Hey, DawgNation, I'm Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. I'm glad you're here. Don't forget, today is the last day for us for a few days. We're off tomorrow, Friday, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. Returning again on Thursday, so we're excited about kind of closing out this run with a bang. We got a lot of fun stuff in the program today. There is a guy, national writer, who thinks that Georgia's a very good bet for the national championship. We'll let him tell us why on today's program, and I think there's a lot of fun stuff coming up today. By the way, also make sure you stick around when we're done with the irregular broadcast for our R.S. Andrews cooldown as we take a lot of your questions and comments as well. It's going to be a fun show. We're glad you're with us as DawgNation Daily begins right now.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
I want to start the show today by talking about the theme of improvement that still needs to happen for Georgia and some Georgia players in particular, and examples of improvement that's already taken place for this program. And I think this is going to be a pretty fascinating look at just how much Georgia has grown over the course of a year and just how legitimate Georgia's chances of really being in the thick of the championship conversation are in 2019. Let me start with the center of all the action for Georgia this upcoming year. That's quarterback Jake Fromm. If you want to go back to Super Bowl week, when we were at Super Bowl opening night in downtown Atlanta, we had a chance to catch up with Trent Dilfer. Dilfer's obviously a former Super Bowl winning quarterback himself, but in addition to that, he's now the head coach of the Elite 11 camp that takes place every year. He knows, Dilfer does, the full gamut of all the top quarterbacks in college football, what makes them good, what they need to improve on, where they were as high school guys, and how they've developed from that time until now. And we asked Dilfer straight up, hey, what does Jake Fromm need more of? For Fromm to take another big step forward in 2019, what does he need? And Dilfer, who's a pretty opinionated guy, didn't hold back with his thoughts on Fromm. Here's what Dilfer said about Georgia's quarterback.
I think he needs to be a little more athletic at the position. He needs to improve in the pocket. He needs to improve his movement patterns. He's got the arm, he's got the brain, he's got the toughness, he's got the leadership. He needs to step it up a little bit athletically, and at that age you can still improve athletically. So we'll see what this next year has for him, but for me, my emphasis if I was coaching him would be show a little more dynamic qualities as an athlete.
All right, a couple things about this. First of all, I do think it's interesting to hear Dilfer say at the age that Fromm is now, he can still become a better athlete, if that's indeed something that he needs, and a guy like Dilfer knows this stuff well. If he says Fromm needs more of that, he is still at an age where you can find that extra reservoir of athleticism. I think that's kind of an interesting piece of evaluation to hear from Dilfer on that front. But what's more interesting to me than that is the word that Dilfer uses a couple times there, athleticism, work on your athleticism. Here's one of the things that makes Jake Fromm really cool. You get the sense that Fromm has a really good understanding of what he does well and what he needs to do more of. Let me go back to about a year or so ago when Fromm was talking about his own development back then, last summer, when he was looking to what he wanted to do more of in 2018. The word that Dilfer uses to say, hey, I need to see more athleticism from Fromm, apparently even last offseason, that was already on Jake Fromm's mind. So if you're thinking about how much Jake Fromm can improve in 2019, let's go back to last year and hear Fromm himself talking about the ways in which he's trying to improve. And one of the things that I think you'll enjoy about this is what Dilfer's objective analysis of Fromm is. Fromm's own analysis of himself is apparently pretty similar. Here is Jake Fromm on this same subject.
I've been tough on myself, really trying to become a better athlete. You always want to get bigger, faster, stronger, trying to get better throwing on the run and this and that. And just trying to kind of attack those things so you kind of have a plan on what you want to get better on and, trying to go attack those things every day. Kind of make a mental note, kind of during your workout on what you want to work on. And you got to have a plan, and just try to follow the plan, try to get better every day. Hopefully it'll kind of work out in the fall.
Now, isn't that kind of neat? Fromm, a clear student of the game, when he talks about his own need to get better, it's almost like he sounds exactly like Trent Dilfer. Dilfer says, hey, I need more pocket awareness. I need you moving around the pocket. I need you showing that athleticism more. And Fromm says, I'm trying to do those same kinds of things. Fromm said that last summer. Dilfer said this a couple of weeks ago, but the two evaluations of Fromm from himself and then the quarterback coach Dilfer were overall pretty similar. Now, here's where I'm going with this. The best part of all of this might be the evidence that's out there that Fromm's ability to work and get better and improve, that he's actually already taking great strides in that regard and maybe taking more of those strides in the season to come. For instance, if you want to go back to around this time a year ago, when Athlon Sports published its top 50 players in college football for the 2018 season, well, Jake Fromm was only number 39 on that list, okay? But when Athlon just published its latest list for the 2019 season, Fromm had gone from number 39 on the list to number 6 on the list. A massive, massive jump. So if you're thinking about Fromm taking the next step in the development with his career, we've already seen some evidence from a year ago that's certainly capable for him. He went from being kind of among the top quarterbacks in college football or on a long list of top players in the sport to now being on the shortest of short lists, both at his own position and of all players of all positions in college football. I think that strikes a tone of optimism for what Fromm may be able to do this upcoming season. But the news for Georgia fans actually gets better than that, because it's not just Fromm that's taken a big step forward. It's the entire program overall. As I said before, one of our themes to start today's show was going to be improvement. Improvement's the kind of thing you hear Kirby Smart talking about a lot. It's not just Jake Fromm who needs to improve in Kirby Smart's mind, nor is it just Jake Fromm who has improved in Kirby Smart's mind. Kirby is demanding that from all players at all positions every single Saturday during the season and every single day of the offseason. You've heard Kirby say this a million times, but here's just another example of just exactly how demanding Kirby can be.
We have to improve. We've got to get better. A lot of things we can work on to get better, and we're going to continue to do that. I thought our team worked really hard last week, and we improved in some areas. We got to continue to do that.
I mean, that quote from Kirby could be from any game, any week, at any point in time. He's kind of always talking in that regard. Well, let's give some evidence and let's give voice to just how much improvement has taken place. A moment ago, I said, if you want to go look in Jake Fromm, just isolate him alone. Last year, he was on the Athlon Sports Top 50 Players list. You may say, what's the value in that? I don't know that there is any value. It's just one evaluation metric that we have, and when you make the year-to-year comparison, this is kind of interesting. Last year, when Athlon Sports, the website that publishes the Top 50 list, when it published its top 50 players, Jake Fromm was number 39. He's grown here to number 6. What I didn't tell you, though, is that Jake Fromm was the only Georgia player on the Athlon top 50 list a year ago. Georgia was going into the 2018 season viewed by a national publication that's got a little prestige to it as having only one player worthy of being among the 50 best in college football. Well, guess what? When Athlon re-released its top 50 list for the 2019 season a couple of days ago, guess how many Georgia players were on there? If you're watching on video, I'll show this on a full screen. Georgia's got not just 4 players on the list, but 4 players in the top 33. It's Jake Fromm at number 6. It's Andrew Thomas at number 18. It's DeAndre Swift, maybe too low, but nonetheless on the list, number 31. Then J.R. Reed at number 33. Now imagine that. If you want to really isolate just how much Georgia's grown over the course of a year, you go from a year ago where Georgia was, among the favorites in the SEC, among the, best odds with a national championship, but according to some objective observers, just one top 50 player. Now it's 4 players in the top 33. I think we all have a sense that the Georgia roster has grown over the course of Kirby Smart's time, and we all have a sense that 2019 is, in many ways, the full embodiment of just how much improvement's taken place. Well, here is some facts to back that up. People that are outside the bubble of DawgNation, people who are looking in on the Georgia program from afar, when they look at Georgia compared to the rest of college football, they see that elite top-end talent. By the way, on both sides of the ball and a lot of different positions. It's a defensive guy. It's an offensive lineman. It's a running back. It's a quarterback. That's a pretty good building block for success in the upcoming year. And I think when you want to talk about the fact that Georgia goes from just one top 50 player a year ago to 4 players in the top 33 for this year, I think that's one of the reasons why Georgia, in every sense of the word, is a legitimate national championship contender for this upcoming season. My name is Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Good to have you with us, no matter how you get to us today. Live on video, 10 a.m., DawgNation, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter feed, radio at noon on Athens Sports Radio 960 The Ref. And we are in podcast form pretty much wherever you find podcasts. We're just glad you found DawgNation Daily here today. Let me also take a moment to remind you that today is actually our last broadcast for a few days. I apologize for stepping away, but we're going to recharge the batteries and reboot the system for a couple of days here. We'll be back again exactly a week from now. Our next show will be next Thursday. So we're off tomorrow. We're off Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday of next week. That's all platforms. We're going to be off for the next few days, but then back live again as normal next Thursday, rolling all through spring practice and everything else. So give us a few days here to recharge the batteries, let our staff that helps do the show each and every day kind of have some rest and relaxation. We'll be back again next Thursday. We certainly appreciate you allowing us to take that time off. All right, coming up in a couple of minutes, we've also got a really fun interview on today's show. There is a national writer who says that he believes that Georgia is a very good bet for the national championship. Now, based on what the Athlon Sports folks have just said, there's obviously some reasons to back that up, but we'll let Bill Bender from the Sporting News explain that coming up in just a couple of minutes, and I think you're going to really enjoy this conversation here on DawgNation Daily today. Before that, though, let's go around the doghouse. Here today, presented by Online Trading Academy, and I started the show with some good news and some good feelings about how many Georgia players are being regarded as among the best in the sport. I do have to speak on a slightly different subject for a moment now, and I think that this is important. It's not necessarily bad news, I don't think, but it is something that Georgia's going to have to deal with. We have just discussed for a while about the branding issue that Georgia may be facing when it comes to its offense, and going out and getting George Pickens on National Signing Day is a great way to combat this. But ultimately, still, there's going to be a little bit of pressure on Georgia offensive coordinator James Coley, I believe, in 2019, to show that the Georgia offense is more than just running backs and offensive linemen. It's good to have those things, but you want to show that the Georgia offense is more than that. And I think it's recruits in particular who are looking in on Georgia to see, what can you show me offensively? How can you show me that you compete and go side to side, head to head with these elite offenses that exist in college football right now? I'm going to invite you to check out Jeff Sintel today at DawgNation.com, who's got a fascinating piece with five-star tight end Reed Gilbert. You're going to love reading this. You may have seen some with Gilbert yesterday on Before the Hedges presented by Kroger. Jeff and I do that show each and every week. Jeff had a chance to catch up with Gilbert. We had a video interview on that. Gilbert is among the top targets that Georgia will pursue in all of 2020. Gilbert's also got some other suitors, as you might imagine. One of those is Clemson. And Jeff asked a very good question to Reed Gilbert. If it's Georgia versus Clemson battling for you right now, how do you see these two programs as being similar or different? And to go back to the theme of Around the Doghouse here today, presented by Online Trading Academy, Gilbert is essentially calling to see Georgia show me some of what you're going to do offensively in the new era with James Coley calling plays. This is a very important statement from Gilbert. Listen closely.
Georgia versus Clemson. How do you compare those two schools?
I mean, they're somewhat similar, but Clemson, I feel, passes a little bit more. So, I mean, that's the difference between them, I guess.
I mean, I'm sorry. When I was watching this yesterday, just like you on Before the Hedges, what Gilbert says really echoes in my head. Here's a guy that Georgia really needs, a guy who's said, even though I could make, tens upon tens of millions of dollars playing defensive end in the NFL, I want to play tight end in college because I'm an offensive-minded guy, he says. And right now, it looks like, according to Gilbert paraphrasing, the more dynamic of the offenses may be Clemson in comparison to Georgia. I think that puts a little bit of pressure on James Coley to show what the Georgia offense is going to be about in 2019. You don't have to run the ball less, and you don't have to be less dominant along the offensive line, but you need to add the other complement to that. Now, it might be one thing to easily disregard this if it was just Gilbert who said it. And by the way, you can see more from Reed Gilbert and Jeff Sintel's piece coming up at DawgNation.com today, and I hope you will check that out. But as I was saying, it'd be easy to disregard this if it was just Gilbert who was saying that. But we've heard other recruits kind of saying the same thing. I won't even get into what Jaden Hazelwood said a lot during the 2018 recruiting cycle. Let me instead give you an example from E.J. Williams, the really good wide receiver from Phoenix City, Alabama, a spot in the South that's known to produce some really good wide receivers. Recently, Williams, talking to Jeff Sintel, kind of echoed some of the same stuff when it comes to the Georgia offense. I'll show you this quote on the screen. E.J. Williams told Jeff Sintel and DawgNation, I mean, right now I fit really well at Georgia in my eyes, even though they are, and these words once again kind of echo, run-heavy school. They don't throw the ball that much. Now, I don't believe that Georgia needs, as I said, that's four-star wide receiver E.J. Williams for the class of 2020. Now, I don't believe that Georgia needs to run the ball less, but I do believe it needs to change the perception with wide receivers and elite tight ends that it doesn't throw the ball enough. I don't want to subtract running plays. I just want to add dynamic passing plays. And I think all Georgia fans should want to feel the same way about this. Now, I also, based on yesterday's edition of Before the Hedges, get some really interesting responses from Georgia fans on Twitter reaching out to me at DawgNation Daily. Let me add this to the conversation. First of all, Philip Yu, who tweeted this at me, he says, I don't think anyone denies that a good running game helps the passing game, Philip says. But then he goes on to say, however, you've got to have a willingness, and that's in all caps, willingness to pass. Kirby, as of yet, hasn't been willing to do that in most games, and recruits see that. Philip goes on to say, I hope James Coley makes a difference. I think a lot of Georgia fans hope that is true. And, by the way, the Georgia offense, statistically speaking, has been just fine. It's been up near the top of almost every category in college football. But Philip says there may be a perception issue with recruits, and I don't necessarily deny that. One more tweet I wanted to show you from a Georgia fan comes from Tamora Sullivan, who also adds an interesting context to this discussion when it comes to the way that Arik Gilbert views the Clemson offense. Let me show you Tamora's tweet here, who says, DawgNation Daily and Jeff Sintel, he says, yeah, Clemson throws the ball more than UGA, but Georgia actually targets the tight ends a lot more than Clemson does. So in this case, looks can be deceiving. And if you go look at the stats, Tamora's is actually right on this. Clemson has thrown the ball a lot, had 2 receivers that almost went over 1,000 yards. One did, one came very close. But in terms of getting tight ends involved, the tight end that had the most number of catches for Clemson a year ago was just a guy with 6. Obviously, Georgia got Isaac Nott a lot more involved in that. But overall, it's about the perception issue here, and obviously that's what James Coley's going to work on. And this will be a big story in the 2020 recruiting cycle and on the field for Georgia in 2019. Can it show off those dynamic passing plays that impress guys like Arik Gilbert and others? That's going to be a story worth watching. It's Around the Doghouse, presented by Online Trading Academy, which provides professional instruction on how you can make money in the markets. Students learn a step-by-step approach to trading and investing. By the way, that's all across the entire spectrum of trading styles, asset classes, in the classroom and online. They've got everything covered for you. So make the best possible decision you can by investing in yourself today. Simply check out this website, tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. That's tradingacademy.com/Atlanta. We appreciate Online Trading Academy presenting Around the Doghouse here on DawgNation Daily. All right, we've got a lot of fun stuff to come on today's program. A very interesting look later on at just how much success Georgia's had recruiting compared to the rest of the SEC East. We'll do that. But for now, as we said, a good friend of DawgNation Daily. Good to have him back on the program. It's Bill Bender of the Sporting News. Glad to have him and you with us here today on DawgNation Daily. So let us take a moment to say hello here to Bill Bender from the Sporting News. Great guy covering college football, and he's written a few things as of late that we thought were pretty interesting. So we wanted to have Bill back on DawgNation Daily here today. Bill, we really appreciate your time. Thanks for sharing it with us, and welcome back to DawgNation Daily. Hope you're doing well.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Brandon. Appreciate it.
Yes, sir, indeed. Let me start with this. You wrote the other day about best bets for the national championship, and obviously we've seen Georgia and Clemson, I should say Clemson and Alabama play for the national championship. And then beyond that, you were looking at some of those other teams that could be real strong contenders, and you had Georgia at the top of your list, and so that certainly kind of got our attention around here at DawgNation Daily. So would you mind going into some more detail about what you think about Georgia this upcoming season, especially compared to those 2 national elite teams that I mentioned a moment ago?
Yeah, I mean, it's most people that if they were picking their national champion for next year, they would start with Alabama or Clemson. That's not rocket science. Those have been the 2 best teams over the last 5 years. But Kirby's done a good job building the recruiting. They've gotten a little bit closer with each year, and they've proven they can play with Alabama. I just think with 3 top 3 recruiting classes in a row, talent matters in this sport. And if it's not Alabama or Clemson, I'd probably go with Georgia next.
Yeah, and I know this is going to sound like it comes from the, I guess, sort of red and black perspective of Georgia, but I think it is kind of interesting that Georgia goes down to the wire with Alabama the last 2 times they played, national championship game at the end of the 2017 season, this past season's SEC championship, and statistically, if you follow like the advanced stats and stuff like that, Georgia has certainly fared, pretty well when compared to Clemson. And yet if you look at a lot of the Vegas stuff that's out there, the online sports books that are out there, there is seemingly still a pretty big gap between Georgia and Clemson and Alabama. And I realize the head-to-head results matter, and Alabama's beaten Georgia, and most people would think that's what Clemson would have done too had they played. And yet I still sometimes of the belief, and I think there are many people in our audience who are kind of a similar belief, that the gap between Georgia and the 2 presumed top teams, Alabama and Clemson, may not be quite as wide as some people around college football might think.
I would agree with that. I mean, big question with Georgia next year is you lose a lot in the receiving game. Jake's going to be thrown to some new receivers. So that's one thing to watch. I think the young and talented defense will be better. You know, they've got no shortage of running backs. So, yeah, I mean, the talent gap is pretty close. I think one thing with those odds, though, is it's kind of with Alabama, it's prove me wrong, right? I know they didn't win the SEC 2 years ago, but they beat Georgia in the national championship game. And until Alabama's stranglehold on the conference is kind of broken, then I think we're going to see more of that. But it wouldn't surprise me to see Alabama and Georgia go back at it again in Atlanta next year. Not at all.
You mentioned the need to replace those receivers for Georgia. They're obviously going to lose their top three by at least receiving yards, guys to the NFL. The two receivers, Ridley and Hardman, and Nada, the tight end there as well. But this also kind of dovetails into another conversation I was having on the show before you joined us, which is the perception that might be out there with some fans, a lot of recruits, that Georgia's too run heavy. Now, the overarching part of this is that the formula that Georgia has used, for the most part, has worked. Georgia's scoring a lot of points, they're racking up a lot of yards, and they're winning a lot of games. But, Bill, from the outside looking in, from the sort of, outside the bubble of DawgNation peering in on this, how would you compare what Georgia's doing, a little more run heavy than some of these other teams that are near the top of the college football playoff conversation? Does Georgia need that extra dimension offensively, or are you fine with Georgia the way that it's going about its business?
No, I think they're fine. I think they run an efficient offense. I mean, if you look at Jake Fromm's numbers, his yards and touchdowns might not be up there with the Lawrence and Tua and Haskins last year, but the efficiency of the passing game was. So, and then you have the running game. They resemble Saban's early dynasty at Alabama, and nobody complained about that when they were winning with two running backs and not a game manager, but like an A.J. McCarron type quarterback. And I think Jake Fromm's better than A.J. McCarron. I think he's, in terms of what we might see at the next level, maybe not in terms of college accomplishments. I don't want to say that because I know what my Twitter handle will look like then. But you get what I'm saying. I think Jake Fromm's got a skill set that will transcend to the next level. So I think their offense is fine. I think the big thing this year is, does that defense develop into a monster, which Kirby's recruited enough talent for it to be that. Now will it be something like what Alabama's had in the past?
Yeah, that's something else that you wrote at the Sporting News, which kind of got my attention. I was glad to see you bring this up because, once again, it's interesting to hear your perspective on this from the national level compared to what Georgia fans have been saying for a while. And for the people who haven't caught your piece on this at sportingnews.com, you were talking about the big takeaway from Georgia's signing class, and you added the elite defensive names that Georgia signed a year ago, guys like Channing Tindall and others, to the big names that Georgia signs this year, the Nolan Smiths of the world and Nakobe Dean. And you said, how are all the, these two signing classes going to add together, and could this be, a real elite defense for Georgia going forward? And, Bill, from a Georgia fan's perspective, there are a lot of Georgia fans who will tell you that in the Kirby Smart era, the Georgia defense has been good, in some cases really good, especially when Roquan Smith was manning the middle at linebacker position, but maybe not truly elite, maybe not dominant. For instance, not a lot of sacks, not a lot of tackles for loss, but as you point out, the recruiting success on that side of the ball over the last couple of years should certainly set the table for doing that. And I think, Bill, a lot of Georgia fans would say one of the reasons why this team hasn't gotten over the hump yet is because that defense has maybe stopped just short of being truly dominant and truly great.
I mean, that defense was Roquan and Baker 2 years ago that played in the championship game was really good. But when I think of the truly elite defenses in the SEC at least since the BCS era, there's Alabama in 16, there's Alabama and LSU in 12. Those were just truly, elite defenses. That's why they played a 9-6 game that year. And then what was the final? The 21-0 in the championship game. I mean, that's elite defense. So, and it's hard to have one of those in today's game though, because it is all predicated on offense. But yeah, I think if all that 5-star talent that Kirby has accumulated on that side of the ball, the Nolan Smiths, those guys that you're talking about, Brenton Cox, if they turn out to be first round, second round NFL talents, then there's no reason to believe that Georgia won't be a monster on that side of the ball for the next 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Now, when you were talking about best bets for national championships, one of the teams that you also mentioned, Sporting News, was Ohio State. And I don't have to tell you how interesting that potential subplot's going to be for the folks around UGA. And it's so funny, Bill, if you go look at any list of national championship odds, it's really ironic how Georgia and Ohio State are listed side by side in almost every instance of this. Obviously, it's Justin Fields at quarterback for Ohio State next season. I mean, it really seems fairly likely that these two programs, Fields and Ohio State, Georgia led by Jake Fromm, they could very well meet in the college football playoff. And I know from the Georgia perspective, that's going to be one of the most wildly interesting things that's ever happened. But I think even nationally, there'd be a lot of curiosity about seeing a guy at quarterback playing against the team that he played for a year ago. But it's not that far-fetched to think this could occur, right?
No, I mean, these are two, along with Oklahoma, Clemson, Alabama. Those 5 schools alone have combined for 75% of the playoff appearances. And they'll be the top 5 in most preseason top 25s, along with, I think, Texas will probably be in that top 6 as well. I mean, Ohio State's got a ton of talent coming back. They've had a stranglehold on the Big Ten. I think Justin Fields fits that offense well. Is going to be able to get the Ryan Day era off to a good start. So, and I'm sure Georgia fans will be watching and monitoring that, because there's 2 ways to look at it. I mean, he wanted to play right away. I get that, but had he stayed at Georgia, I'm sure, one more year, he would have been set up kind of ironically to have that Dwayne Haskins type year with Georgia, where Haskins waited his turn at Ohio State. But this is the world we live in with transfer quarterbacks. That's not going to change. Georgia's just figured that out with both Fields and Eason. Eason's going to be pretty interesting at Washington next year.
Yeah, you're right about that. It's really unusual to see these former Georgia quarterbacks kind of sprinkled across the landscape, and I do think Eason could have a nice year for the Huskies. Let me finish with this, Bill, before we let you go. I think one of the other interesting things about Georgia and its placement in the SEC is over the last couple of years, it's really dominated the SEC East. It's swept the division. I think it's won every one of those games by at least 14 points. On paper, at least, it looks like Florida's getting better. You've written about the Gators a bit as of late as well. I mean, do you see an example of the gap being closed in the East right now? Florida would seem to be the team most likely to do that if it is going to occur. I mean, how much closer do you think Florida is making things with Georgia as of right now? The Dogs obviously have had kind of an easy run in the division the last couple of years.
I think the gap's the same. I think, it's about holding the gap. Because Florida's always going to compete with Georgia for recruits and talent and on the field in the game. That game was tight in spots last year. So I think it is Florida. You got to wonder if Tennessee's going to throw their name into that. And can Kentucky continue the momentum they've had with Stoops up there? They had a nice year last year. I was at that game, though. They just weren't ready for Georgia. So, I think it's about Georgia and Florida moving forward, and maybe Tennessee in a few cycles. But they'll always compete for those recruits. But right now, Georgia still has that advantage in the division, no doubt.
Bill, if people want to find more of your work at the Sporting News and some of the stuff you got going on, how can we find you online?
Yeah, I'm at BillBender92, sportingnews.com. We have a Facebook page and everything. So check us out there. We'll have plenty of off-season content. It's a long off-season. I can't stand it. But, hopefully we have more that you and I can talk about along the line here before we get into September.
Well, look forward to that, Bill. We appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for being a part of the program.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me.
Good stuff there from Bill Bender from the Sporting News. And one of the things I do like to do from time to time is go outside, as I like to call it, the bubble of Dog Nation. Find out what those national guys are saying. And as I mentioned with Bill talking, one of the things that he had written that got my attention was when he looked a little deeper at the Georgia signing class. Here's what Bill Bender had written in the Sporting News. He writes, the Bulldogs had 7 5-star commits in 2018, though Justin Fields did transfer. He says, do Nolan Smith and Nakobe Dean and Trayvon Walker combined with Tyson Campbell and Brenton Cox and Adam Anderson, all who made contributions in 2018 to build the nation's most talented defense over the next 2 to 3 years? I think that's a really interesting question, and I think that shows some insight on Bill's behalf, because as much as we talk about offense, we just started the show with a whole bunch on offense, at least in large measure, about what recruits want to see from a maybe more dynamic Georgia offense. Even if that's just perception, that's what recruits kind of want to see, and we'll obviously continue to have that conversation. But I think overall, Bill's right, that the more interesting discussion might be the evolution that's occurring on defense, where the Georgia defense has been really good. really good. 2017 was obviously a really good defense, college football playoff worthy defense. But was it the kind of defense that goes into the historic category? The way Bill Bender just described some of those in recent years, many of those SEC teams who were able to do that. And when I think about the greatness on that side of the ball, the greatness on defense, I'm also thinking about those havoc plays, sacks. Most people would say that Georgia hasn't done enough of those. Even Kirby Smart has acknowledged that the Georgia pass rush is good at times, but maybe not consistently stellar. When you combine the recruiting work that Georgia did in 2018, the recruiting work in 2019, it's not that big of a leap to say, how do all these really dynamic pieces fit in with each other? It's not just sacks, by the way. You can also think about tackles for loss as well. You know, the top elite, true, high-level defenses are major, major factors in the backfield. They're exciting to watch. They put up the big numbers. And the Georgia defense, with the level of talent that's been brought in as of late, all of a sudden that starts feeling like a much, much more likely conversation to have. And that could be one of the things worth watching in 2019. By the way, I'll also invite you to check out yesterday's edition of DawgNation Daily, where we talked about one of those guys in depth. You know, we pay close attention to guys like Nolan Smith and even Jermaine Johnson, the junior college transfer, because it's easy to draw a line for how they may be contributing and competing on the field for Georgia this upcoming season. It's easy to imagine that. It's the same thing is kind of true for Nakobe Dean, the 5-star linebacker. We've seen freshman linebackers play some. Georgia had a few in the mix this past year, so we probably talk a lot about them. But when you watch we showed the dunk yesterday from Trayvon Walker, and we had some fun with this on Before the Hedges yesterday afternoon with Jeff on the DawgNation video channels as well. But when you watch that and you think about all these 5-star signees that Georgia's brought in on that defensive side of the ball over the last couple of years, I mean, there's a really good chance that we haven't been talking enough about Trayvon Walker, that we haven't been dealing with that as much as we should, because when a guy like a Bill Bender from the Sporting News starts kind of thumbing through the list of guys that Georgia signs, starts looking at those 5-star names, you know, Walker just kind of is included in that list among those. But when you really stand next to him and you see the kind of physical condition that he's in, and you see those videos that pop up from time to time when he shows off that athleticism, you realize, you know what? On this list of really top Georgia defensive guys, Trayvon Walker may be right there in the mix with that. So fun stuff from Bill Bender from the Sporting News. The overall takeaway is Bill seems to think that Georgia on the very short list for national championship teams here in 2019, and some of those young emerging defensive stars might be the reason why. That's certainly the kind of thing that's going to get a lot of Georgia fans excited about the upcoming season, and we'll look forward to doing that kind of stuff from time to time here on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, it's great to have you with us on the program.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
All right, good stuff from Bill Bender from the Sporting News. And, of course, now time for our SEC Through. And let me remind you before we get rolling in the SEC Through too much, today is Valentine's Day, and hopefully you're taking care of the special someone in your life, or if you're the special someone, hopefully you're getting taken care of today. If you're still looking for a way to get that done and make that happen, don't forget about our friends at Kroger, because today at noon, one more chance to catch up on that chocolate dipping station. I just think this sounds like a lot of fun. Dipping stuff in chocolate never seems like a bad idea. Today's a great time to do that at Kroger, and while you're there getting your stuff dipped in chocolate, you can also get greeting cards, flowers, anything else. Maybe you can dip those in chocolate too. Who's to say that's a bad idea? But it's all for you at your local Atlanta Kroger, as they got you really, really well taken care of heading towards Valentine's Day. Good stuff for them. All right, SEC Through, a couple SEC stories that I want to get to, and then I want to look some more at the way that Georgia compares the rest of the SEC East, and maybe a little bit of a rebuttal to what we had earlier in the program this week. First of all, speaking of the SEC East, I guess Florida's getting some good news, and I don't remember who reported this first, but it's out there that Todd Grantham is staying at Florida. He's not taking the Cincinnati Bengals job. And there are a couple things going on here that I think are kind of interesting. We are kind of in a weird era for the NFL where you've seen a lot of one-and-done NFL coaches. There's a real high level of impatience in the NFL right now, which may be turning some guys off to that. You know, Derek Ansley apparently is leaving the Raiders to become Tennessee defensive backs coach. That's the kind of movement from coaches you wouldn't have seen all that long ago. Todd Grantham, whose background's in the NFL, offered a chance to be a defensive coordinator in the NFL. It wasn't that long ago. That was a no-brainer that you took that job. Now for Grantham, apparently it's not. Now, I guess he's also going to get a big-time raise, upwards of the almost, $1.8, $2 million range to stay at Florida. So That's kind of a big deal on this. But Florida holding on to its defensive coordinator. Now, for a lot of Georgia fans, they view this as good news because they don't think of Grantham as a very good defensive coordinator, and I guess I'm kind of in that mix. I've always felt like that Grantham was a little bit problematic, and there's certainly plenty of evidence from his time at Georgia that suggests that. However, I think for Florida having to replace a defensive coordinator this late in the process, I think that would have been harder on the program. So even though I'm no great fan of Grantham as a coach, keeping him for Florida is actually probably better than losing him for right now. And so that looks indeed like that's what the Gators are going to do. Another SEC story worth getting to. I saw a tweet from Jared Garantano, the Tennessee quarterback. He is apparently pretty impressed with what he's seeing from his new offensive coordinator thus far. Garantano tweeting this out, that this Coach Chaney offense, and there's a lot of fireball emojis coming off that tweet from Jared Garantano. So apparently he's very happy with the tutelage that he's getting from Jim Chaney right now. And going back to Chaney's time at Georgia, I've said this before, that I was more of a fan of Chaney than many of you were. A lot of you were pretty critical of Chaney over the course of time. I think that Chaney was fine. I don't think he was the best offensive coordinator. I don't think he was the worst offensive coordinator. I think he was just a competent offensive coordinator. There are a shortage of those. So for the most part, I do think that Tennessee will be happier having him than not having him, I guess. I don't know that he's probably worth 6 fireball emojis. I'd probably put the overall level of Chaney satisfaction somewhere below 6 fireball emojis. But nonetheless, as it stands right now, Jared Garantano is pretty happy about that. I was joking with some of our friends here before the show started today that if there was a Mount Rushmore of topics we probably talked way too much about on DawgNation Daily, one of those may have been the Josh Belk saga from a year ago. Belk, you might remember, was a 4-star defensive tackle, a 2018 signee with Clemson, but then he quickly transferred from that program. And listen, at the time, Georgia really needed those defensive linemen. I guess probably still does to a certain extent. But at the time, Georgia really needed defensive linemen. So I spent a lot of time talking about, would it be Georgia who got in the mix for Belk services? Well, no, it ended up being the other South Carolina program, the University of South Carolina, who got Josh Belk. Belk, I think probably it's fair to say, battled some weight issues while he was in Columbia, never really made much of an impact on the field, and Belk is now leaving the Gamecocks program, as South Carolina has announced this week. So this truly does end up being much ado about nothing, and sometimes that's the way it goes. Not all these prospects pan out, but whatever's going on with Belk's life now, looking for a third school in just about 2 years' time, I hope he gets it figured out, because obviously he can be a talent at a position that a lot of football programs really need, but it has not worked out for Josh Belk as of yet, and he'll be now looking for school number 3 moving on. Let me do one more SEC through story. It's a little bit off the beaten path a little bit, but this may be worth watching. You may have seen some national media coverage over the last day or so about Jimmy Haslam, who's the Cleveland Browns owner. There was a piece at ESPN.com not too long ago that was critical of the way the Browns organization has been run, and I think it's Sports Business Journal that's reporting that Haslam, the Browns owner, also owns Pilot Flying J, which is a truck stop / convenience store type thing. Well, he was apparently angered enough by the coverage that the Browns got from ESPN.com that he has pulled his advertising from ESPN for Pilot Flying J. Now, I don't know what all Pilot Flying J appears on, but I have seen those commercials a lot on the SEC network. So I'm going to assume, now this is not some report, I'm just assuming, that it's going to be the SEC network that ends up being hit hardest by this millions of dollars of advertising that's been pulled back from the ESPN family of network. And it is very difficult to replace that kind of money when it's gone. You can replace some of it. It's difficult to replace all of it. One of the things that's always made the SEC network a unique sports network compared to a lot of other, as I'm going to call them, regional networks is, you watch your local cable regional network that shows, like, say, Braves games here in Atlanta or something like that. They don't have a lot of programming during the day for the most part. Those networks only exist to show the games at night, Braves games, Hawks games, whatever, or in this case, SEC, basketball games, baseball games, and everything else. But the SEC network's always been a little bit different in that regard, because they do have programming during the day or extra shows that come on from time to time. And the only way you're able to do that is by having sponsors like Pilot Flying J. So maybe tuck this back in the corner of your mind. The SEC network just lost apparently a pretty significant investor into its programming, and we will watch in the months to come if that has any kind of impact on the SEC programming. For the most part, I really like what the SEC network does. I enjoy the network. I enjoy the shows that it produces. You got to have good sponsors to produce those, and the SEC network just lost one. This may be worth paying attention to, and with that, we'll make that your SEC through. And by the way, speaking of good sponsors, let me tell you about a great offer that's out there right now by our friends at Pella Window and Door. You know, they are great at equipping your house with energy-efficient windows and doors, which is a really important thing because, after all, your air conditioning bill goes up, your heating bill goes up, your house just doesn't feel as comfortable as it could if you don't have those really good windows and doors. Well, Pella Window and Door has got the best, and they provide the top-flight service for you as well because they are family-owned. It's a national company, but it's a family-owned branch right here in Georgia. So really you get the best of both regards from that standpoint. They also offer a lifetime warranty and top-of-the-line equipment and unparalleled expertise. But even better than that right now, they've got a terrific offer that I want to make sure you're aware of. You can currently get 40% off qualifying installations or 0% APR for the next 48 months. But that's only valid until March 28th. So you got to go right now to take advantage of that offer between now and March 28th. The way to get in touch with them and get your free in-home consultation scheduled is by simply going to either the website, which is pellasoutheast.us. That's pellasoutheast.us, or giving them a call in their Dunwoody showroom at 404-445-2979. 404-445-2979. Pella Window and Door of Georgia, it's viewed to be the best. Something else that's been viewed to be the best as of late has been Georgia on the recruiting trail. Now, we talked earlier this week about, from a statistical standpoint, you can make a case there are other programs kind of creeping in on Georgia and Alabama in the SEC. All of a sudden, it looks like this league has a bit more parity. Things are getting balanced out a little bit more. Well, we thought it was important to bring that up earlier in the week, but it's probably also important to bring up a counterexample to that about how even though some SEC teams are getting better, where it really matters, the gap with Georgia might not being closed all that much at all. An example of this, and I wanted you to see it, comes from Richard Johnson, a writer from SBNation.com, who gave Georgia a pretty good compliment the other day, that when it comes to dominating your division in recruiting, few programs have ever done that more than Georgia has, including big bad Alabama. Let me read this to you. It's a few sentences long, but I think it's important to keep in mind about just how good Georgia's been in this regard. Richard writes at SB Nation, Georgia's 5-star lead over the rest of the SEC East, meaning 5-star sign in comparison, is 15-4 since Smart's gotten things rolling. This type of recruiting dominance is slightly different from Alabama when you compare the Tide to the SEC West. He says Alabama never lapped its division this way. Bama's best 3-year stretch since Texas A&M joined the league was from 2013 to 2015 when it signed 18 5-stars. The rest of the West signed just 24. This obviously includes teams like LSU and Auburn. Isn't that interesting, Richard Johnson, that we think about Alabama as unprecedented recruiting success? But when it comes to compare to the rest of the division, not necessarily so. Not the way that Georgia is. Because in Alabama's best time, it still did not outsign the rest of the SEC West when it comes to 5-star guys. But Georgia signed 15, and the rest of the divisions only signed 4. So when it comes to punching a ticket in the SEC East to the SEC championship game, it looks like Georgia's in pretty good shape to do that for many years to come. And I thought Richard Johnson's piece at SB Nation was pretty interesting there in that regard. Let me also say this, speaking of the SEC East and rivals therein, Florida, it has now been 838 days since those lousy, stinking Gators have beaten the Georgia Bulldogs. That is certainly good news, and we're glad to share it as a part of our Gator Hater Updater right here on DawgNation Daily. And as I said, we love watching that number climb each and every day. I will also say we're really excited about some time off here. No show for us Friday, nor Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. But we are back 1 week from today, and we'll look forward to enjoying that with you. And we'll see you then right here on DawgNation Daily. And on video, we still are going to finish with a bang with our R.S. Andrews cool down. We're kind of hot and heavy from today's show, like all of the shows. And so we'll use this as a cool down period, as many of your questions and comments as possible, as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down right now. And it was also fun to get a couple tweets in the show today. I love bringing in your thoughts to the conversation that we're having. I think it's important to be able to do that to kind of balance some of the things that I'm saying, or in some case validate the overall opinion of Georgia fans overall. So I also appreciate you sharing those as part of DawgNation Daily as well. So really good stuff, and we'll get all of that rolling right now. Thank you so much for being here. Maurice, I'm ready. Richardson says, I feel like we're going to have the best defense in all of college football this season. I certainly think that Georgia has a chance to take that. Now, obviously, much the same way that replacing Roquan Smith was a big issue for Georgia in 2018, replacing DeAndre Baker is a big issue for Georgia in 2019, especially when you factor in the way that the smart guys will tell you that experience really matters when it comes to college football playoffs, or I should say college football playoff secondaries. That experience really matters for those for those units. Replacing Baker won't be easy, but the other pieces really look to be in place. There really looks to be a lot of depth, and so I don't think there's anything wrong with having very high expectations and high hopes for what Georgia's defense may be able to do this season. And specifically, that's going to be noticed. That's going to specifically show up in the way of extra sacks and tackles for loss and just those dynamic, havoc-wreaking plays that Georgia probably hasn't had enough of over the last couple of seasons. Georgia ought to be able to win more individual battles defensively, get off blockers, and get in there and really wreak a lot of havoc. That should be a lot of fun to see. Matt Rukavina says, BA, everyone from Athlon to Feinbaum says we have the best returning offensive line in football. Turn them loose. Yeah, that ought to be an asset, and I think it's probably true as well. That ought to be an asset that Georgia can really use to its advantage. Giving Fromm more time to throw, more time to develop deep passing routes, or looking around to survey the field to find more third and fourth options, or just, lighten the holes up for a guy like DeAndre Swift. It ought to be an incredible asset to have the best offensive line in college football. And I would say that Georgia probably is in that conversation too. Yeah, these are happy days for Dog fans for sure. Steve Weimer says, have a great vacation, BA. Steve, I really appreciate that. I am looking forward to a little time off. Not going anywhere, but I'm looking forward to it. Amos Williams says LeCount's tackling issues could be an issue. Also replacing DeAndre Baker's the thing to think about too. And I know that Richard LeCount has had some issues with bringing down a ball carrier, especially towards the end of last season, and that seemed like it became a bigger deal. And yet, I'm not selling any of my Richard LeCount stock. I still have a lot of expectations for LeCount. Now, he's going to get pushed this year. Otis Reese wants to be on the field. Lewis Seen wants to be on the field. There are a lot of safeties for Georgia that are fighting for that playing time, and LeCount's going to have to hold those guys off. And that's not going to be an easy thing to do. But overall, I still believe that there is a lot of good football left for Richard LeCount, and I don't think there's anyone that's going to be more honest in his self-evaluation than LeCount's going to be when he looks at what he did a year ago, what he did well, and what he needs to improve on. We saw that from LeCount at the beginning of last season. He had gotten some criticism from Kirby that had been noticed by some of the media. LeCount took reporters' questions head-on about that before last season started, and he was very open and honest and welcoming it. I think he likes being challenged, and my guess is he'll be challenged a lot this offseason. I'm guessing he'll probably respond in a pretty positive way on that. So I'm not done with Richard LeCount by a long shot. Tony Porter says Devon Wilson will replace Baker with little to no drop-off. Everywhere else in defense will be better. Just need a leader like Ledbetter on the defensive line. I agree with you about that leadership emerging and the role that Jonathan Ledbetter was in. And I think that Devon Wilson's a really special prospect too, but I can't go there with you that it's going to be an unnoticeable drop-off from DeAndre Baker to Devon Wilson. Wilson may eventually be good as DeAndre Baker, but in the early stages of passing that baton from one to the other, and I do think that Devon Wilson's certainly in competition for a lot more playing time this season now that he's fully healthy again, I think you're probably discounting how valuable DeAndre Baker proved to be for Georgia a year ago. I think overall the Georgia defense can absorb the loss of Baker, I do, but I do think it's a significant thing to think about. Anthony Vino Sneed asking about Nadab Joseph. That's an interesting question. We need to talk to Jeff Sintel more about that at some point in time. What's next with Nadab Joseph? That's worth talking about. Philip Jordan Wells says, I wouldn't be a pleasant surprise if Brini and Speed stepped up this season. Two guys who were thought to be passed over, passing others. Well, in the case of one of those 2017 signees, Eric Stokes, I mean, I think when he got his chance to play this year, he definitely played better than expectations would have been for him. So who's to say that those other guys, and I know that in the case of like Trey Bishop, he's put himself in the transfer portal. So, maybe some of those guys will, look to hang around and fight and get some playing time. And as Philip said, maybe they can be a little bit like Eric Stokes, who when you finally get a chance to be on the field, you make the most of that opportunity. Greg Childer says, look at Monty Rice for the chance of becoming a leader. I think that's a pretty good name to think about for sure. I think that's a pretty good name to think about. Danny Smith also says, we know Kirby Smart teaches good tackling. I'm not sure what the heck was going on last year with so many missed tackles. That's probably a fair question to ask, Danny. I know that some of those did come in bunches during the Sugar Bowl, and we've had people tell us that given the way that bowl practice goes, that you see a lot of missed tackles in bowls, maybe more so than other games, just because of the nature of the game. But Georgia certainly had its issues in more than just the Sugar Bowl. So that's probably a very fair question to ask. Let me go over here to YouTube as part of our R.S. Andrews cool down and take some YouTube comments over here today. Give you a chance to weigh in for what will be the last time for a few days for us here on DawgNation Daily. JC69 says, I think Otis Reese is going to take Richard LeCounte's job or somebody else. It's going to be very hard to keep Otis Reese off the field. I won't deny that. And, this is one of those things where LeCounte competes against Reese, competes against Lewis Seen, who I think is a freshman who's also potentially capable of playing a bit. And we may all end up being the winners of that competition because whichever safety does emerge from that group is going to be a pretty impressive player. So there is there's no doubt that there's a lot of depth in that safety position right now and a lot of competition going on there. Keith Vold says, I really think the Gator Hater Countdown needs to include how many days do we beat them again. Looking back breeds complacency. Looking forward helps us stay aggressive. So that's interesting, Keith. We made the decision to change that this year because we had done that the last couple of years. We did the countdown. And we thought it might be just fun to do it a slightly different way this year. But that's an interesting look at that. I appreciate you sharing that. Brian Kephart says, BA, give some love to our Georgia Ice Dogs winning the SEC HC. I'm not sure what the H stands for. I know the hockey team's hockey championship, I guess. And our ladies indoor tennis team winning the national championship. That's exactly right. Indoor tennis did win the national championship, and the hockey team won, I guess, it's the club championship. Is that what that is? So good to see the Ice Dogs and the tennis team doing really well there. That's a really good point. Well done by both the hockey team and the tennis team. Good stuff. Tyler Stolar says that freshmen will be the biggest impact on offense or defense this year. So on offense, for me, it's likely to be the wide receivers, a Dominic Blaylock, a George Pickens. Those are the names that I think about when I think about freshmen making an impact on offense. For me, on defense, the name most likely there, probably if you want to count Jermaine Johnson as a first-year player, he probably doesn't factor into the freshman talk. But as a newcomer to the program, I'd put Nolan Smith and Jermaine Johnson, those two outside linebacker pass rusher guys, in that discussion. And I would say there's also a chance that Nakobe Dean gets in the field too, but really watch those newcomers as those outside linebackers as Georgia tries to amp up its pass rush. I could definitely see Nolan being a part of that, and I could see Jermaine Johnson being a part of that too. Dapper Dan says, I feel like targeting prevention hurt Richard LeCounte's tackling. It's an interesting thought. I have always believed that we kind of just quickly brush over how difficult it is for the modern player to know how to go about tackling when so much is not allowed anymore. And when you're running full speed the way these defensive players do, this is not just Richard LeCounte, this is anyone. When you're running full speed and all of a sudden the guy about to catch the football, the guy with the football, all of a sudden he drops down. Now the angle with which you hit him completely changes, and now the rules demand that you make that change as well. I just think that it's amazing the football players are able to control that aggression as much as they are to make what are within the boundaries of the rules legal hits now. I think that, I'm not going to mind telling you this at all. I think we've gone way too far in the way that we've generated a level of hysteria about some of this kind of stuff that I'm not quite sure is backed up by science, especially some of the new research that's out there. But nonetheless, everybody wants players to be safe, and I do think it's putting an undue burden and pressure on defensive players. So but whether it'll be LeCounte or anybody, I think it's amazing they've controlled their bodies as well as they have. That's not an easy thing to do on what are, for the most part, instinctual plays. Alan Young says, what days were DawgNation Daily off again? So we're not going to be here tomorrow, and then Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. DawgNation Daily returns a week from today. Next Thursday we'll be back. So looking forward to that. Georgia Peach and Tyler Stolar both talking about Jake Fromm staying for all 4 years. if it's a weird thing because obviously Fromm playing well enough to leave after this year would be great for the team, but Fromm leaving after his junior year would be bad for the program. It'd be great to have Fromm put up the kind of numbers that would put him in the conversation to truly be a junior in the NFL draft, but the succession plan beyond Jake Fromm right now, I don't believe is fully filled out. So that would be quite a conundrum for Georgia to deal with. Richard Lumpkin says he's just popping in because he has to work today. Miss y'all in a few days while BA is off. Go Dogs, stay faithful, and let's get ready for spring ball. Richard, that's well said. We appreciate you popping in to say hello here today. Brian Kephart, thanks for the kind words with the upcoming time off. Really looking forward to the build-up towards spring practice. I think that's going to be a lot of fun. K9 Blues says have a great Valentine's Day, and I'm going to miss the show while we're gone. I'm going to miss all of you as well. I love our comments here as a part of our R.S. Andrews cool down. It's always a lot of fun. We appreciate the just the fun, kind of casual Georgia conversation we're able to have during this portion of the day. It's always great. Winston Mock says, "BA, we're going to go into the DTs for the next week with no show." Yeah, listen, I'm going to miss having the show too. It's going to be weird. And there aren't that many days when we don't do it because I don't really take that many days off. But when 10 a.m. does roll around on a weekday and I'm not doing the show, there's always kind of a weirdness about that. I'm not quite sure what to do with myself. Daniel Roebuck, thanks for the kind words. Spencer Moore says, will Mike and Centel and Chip do their shows? I'm assuming that everything else will be like normal. I haven't heard yet. Yeah, everything else is going to be just like normal, so I haven't heard of any differences there on that. So all the other shows will take place next week for sure. So that shouldn't be any different. Let me get a few more. Let me also ask this. Were you as impressed with I was about what we started the show with today? That if you go back and look at this time a year ago, Avalon Sports, who puts its top 50 players list out, and I like lists, I always have, just one Georgia player in the top 50 a year ago, 4 in the top 33 going into 2019. That's a pretty significant increase, I think. Not that the Athlon list is the be-all, end-all of talent evaluation, but I have to say, I think that's a pretty impressive level of growth for the program. Lottie Lauderdale, thanks for the kind words. Miriam Martin Corbett, thanks for the kind words as well. And Philip Jordan Wells, you as well. Connor Riley joins us, by the way.
To your point about the players getting better, other than J.R. Reed, I don't think Georgia fans were surprised that Thomas and Swift were as good as they were. It just took the national media longer to catch on.
That's probably true. I guess to me this is more about the program growth that in comparison to the rest of college football, these guys are now standing head and shoulders. Because the one thing I say every single year is it's okay not to have preseason All-SEC players or preseason All-Americans, but if you're going to win the conference, if you're going to be in the college football playoff, you've got to have guys on the end-of-the-year list. And so, for the most part, the development for those guys has occurred the way that it's supposed to. Now, in the case of J.R. Reed, that for me may stand as a bit of a surprise. I just think it shows an overall level of growth for the program that you're talking about that kind of top-end talent. That means that, for me, the championship conversations, the short list to win this whole thing, that's validated by the top-end talent that's present there, because there have been plenty of years for Georgia when you look at these kinds of lists and you haven't seen those kinds of players. It's difficult to make a big leap about having a big year if you don't have the kind of star players that can back that up. But for Georgia, they've obviously unlocked that by the kinds of big-time players who've emerged for the program. Let me go back over to YouTube for a moment. Cameron Merrill says, and the national media still underrates Andrew Thomas. He says they love the average Jonah Williams at Alabama, of course. So is Andrew Thomas, underrated? I don't really know. I mean, I think for a lot of us, evaluating offensive linemen properly is probably a difficult thing to do, and I think that Andrew Thomas is going to get his attention next spring when he's likely, the number 8 overall pick or something like that. I just think that's an incredibly valuable weapon that I think that Georgia needs to be able to use to its advantage, because there are a lot of these people that study offensive lines and write about this kind of stuff that'll tell you that offensive line is a chemistry position. This is not the way it is where you just put 5 really good guys out there. and hope for the best, but one guy benefits the others. It's the way the 5 guys interact with each other. And so what Thomas has a chance to do is not only put himself into the first round of the NFL draft, but also make the other 4 offensive linemen better as they work together in that regard. And as I've said, I just think that's an incredibly, incredibly valuable asset for Georgia to have in this upcoming season.
So to sort of change the subject a little bit, Javaris Hanna, I think, asked a good question. BA, do you think Georgia will have that Tyreek Hill type player on offense and that Cam Chancellor hard hitter safety, or the Jalen Ramsey lockdown corner type on defense? As far as the Tyreek Hill type, he's obviously not as fast as Hill is, but I do think you could use a guy like Dominic Blaylock in a way that the Chiefs do, in the sense of you're getting him the ball in a variety of different ways, whether it be in a screen pass, speed sweep, or attacking the defense vertically. I think Blaylock's going to be good enough to come in and sort of perform in a manner similar to Tyreek, obviously just not with the top-tier athleticism. As far as defense, I mean, Otis Reese seems like hand-built to be sort of that Cam Chancellor, just physical. I'm going to just hit you as hard as I can, and you're going to fumble the football type of player.
Yeah, I would think that's probably true, too, and that's another thing to look for this year. You can't really measure this with stats, but once again, for a Georgia defense that I believe has been very good, but maybe just south of great, a way that you take that next level is you do have those highlight plays where a safety is separating a would-be receiver or ball carrier from the football. Now, within the rules, you're going to do that differently than Thomas Davis and Greg Blue used to do that in a Georgia uniform. But the kind of safeties who are capable of doing that is another level of dynamism the Georgia defense can show, and I think that Otis Reese can be a really good candidate to do that. I do think that Reese has got some really bright days ahead in a Georgia uniform, and I love the idea of a player who was a linebacker in high school bringing that level of physicality to the safety position. I think that's what top-end, high-level football is all about, and I think that Reese is a really exciting player in that regard. Mike D., also on the YouTube comment section, asked an interesting question. He said, B.A., what game are you looking the most forward to this season? My answer to this might be a surprise, because as excited as I am about the big high-profile non-conference game of Notre Dame coming into Athens, that's going to be an incredible moment. Texas A&M for the first time as an SEC team making its way to Sanford Stadium. There's going to be a lot of hype around that game. As excited as I am about all that kind of stuff, the game that I kind of have circled right now, and I'm going to talk more about this in the days ahead, that's Georgia going to Auburn in November. Even though Auburn right now does not on paper look to be a top 10 preseason team, I think that Georgia's got to prove that it can handle the hostile road environment. Even in a situation like last October where there were probably 20,000 Georgia fans in Baton Rouge, Georgia did not handle on the road at LSU very well. Did not handle on the road at Auburn very well in November of 2017. There are only a couple of true road tests for Georgia this year. Auburn is obviously one of those, probably the toughest. I think that Tennessee on the road in October may be a little bit of juice associated with that game because obviously Vols fans are going to try to create a big atmosphere for that game. Seeing how Georgia performs in these hostile road environments, we talked about Jake Fromm improving off the top of the program. This would be another way you can really demonstrate that by not even flinching by a hostile crowd, tough defense on the road. Because Auburn's defense, offensively, they're probably still a lot to be determined about how good that unit's going to be. But defensively, I would expect Auburn to be really good on that side of the ball. Good defense, tough crowd. Let's see Georgia go in there and really send a message. Believe it or not, as much hype as the other games are going to get, the road trip to Auburn for me is the game I have circled right now more than any other.
So before I give my answer, I'm going to deconstruct yours.
Okay.
I get your point about wanting to go into a hostile road environment.
Georgia just hasn't done that well.
Correct. Kirby has not beaten an SEC West team on the road yet. Mm-hmm. I will say, I wonder how hostile that Auburn environment is going to be if that's a team that going into that game already has 3 or 4 losses. Auburn plays Oregon early next season. They play Texas A&M at home, I believe. They're at Florida. They're at LSU, where they haven't won since 1999. There's a chance if they lose, 2 of those first 3, it starts snowballing, and they're coming in that Georgia game with 4 losses. I get it's a rivalry game, but, you just wonder, what sort of that environment will be like. As far as the game I'm most looking forward to.
Before you say that, let me just respond back to this. I'm not ready to make my official predictions on anything yet, SEC-wise, but I think that my instincts right now lead me to say that Auburn's going to be better than you just described. We got a whole, 6 months to figure all that out, but my instincts would lead me to believe that Auburn's not losing as much as you just described. But nonetheless, the game you're most looking forward to.
Before we turn this into Auburn Daily, you think A&M is a top 10 team? You think LSU is going to be pretty good next year? I mean, I think Oregon's going to be pretty good next year.
I think
at Florida.
I mean, if you really want to get more into it, I think Auburn's going to have the LSU game circled. I do. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on Malzahn for that LSU game. So even though I think LSU is actually probably pretty good, I think that's the kind of game that Malzahn, who's a little bit of a self-preserver, when you think he's about to really get the final nail driven in, he finds some way to wriggle free. That may be his wriggle free moment, which would preserve the sizable atmosphere for the Georgia-Auburn game. And then ultimately Malzahn's fate as the coach may be determined by those two home games against the two big rivals, Georgia and Alabama. But that's kind of the vision.
And I thought LSU was going to stink this year, and I was very wrong on that. So as far as the game I'm most looking forward to, I mean, this is a layup. It's Notre Dame. Georgia hasn't had a big non-conference game at home since Clemson when I was a junior in college. That game was a ton of fun. Kind of wish it was the first game of the season, but with it being September 21st, we'll have some time to sort of see what Georgia looks like.
Yeah, it's unusual to play that big of a non-conference game that late in the
fourth
year.
Week of the season.
Yeah, because I think we've seen some of these big games stretch as far as like week 3. Like I want to say Ohio State, Oklahoma may have been week 3 at one point, maybe. But week 4 is kind of late in the year.
Its schedule's weird this year because it does technically start like a week earlier, I guess. But I just think it's a team. Notre Dame was a playoff team a year ago. Well, and there were a lot of Georgia fans that thought Georgia should have been in there over Notre Dame because Notre Dame didn't play in a conference championship game. I won't relitigate that, but I think it's and given how great that game was 2 years ago, I think there's a really good chance this game sort of is a similar effect with Georgia fans getting to watch in front. And this time, instead of it being half and half, it'll be just all Georgia.
The other thing, the other thing I'm kind of curious to see, I mean, I've been going to Georgia games my entire life, and most of those games, now as of late, that's not been the case, but for most of those games, I was a ticket-buying fan. The one thing we really haven't seen, to my knowledge, and maybe somebody's going to correct me and say otherwise, I can't really recall a home game in Athens where the tickets were just impossible, where like the secondary market rate was like $500. I just can't think of a time like that. That was clearly the case in South Bend back in 2017, where, tickets were just off the charts expensive, $600-700. I heard every kind of crazy total imaginable. So it would stand to reason that may be the same thing again for the 2019 return date for Notre Dame. But that's really unusual for Sanford Stadium. It's a big stadium. For the most part, people who want to go can go. I've seen tickets get as high as $200. I haven't seen that many games where the going rate on the secondary market went too far north of $200. Now, some of y'all may say, "BA, you're crazy. So-and-so game was outrageous." That's not my memory of this. It's going to be really interesting to see if that secondary ticket market really holds its value in Sanford Stadium the way that it did in South Bend a couple of years ago, because there was a scarcity there because it was opposing fans that were holding on to most of those tickets. This could be an interesting dynamic to see just how expensive, and the A&M game could be very much the same thing because that's a big fan base. They haven't been here, and late in November, this could be a battle of top 10 teams. It'll be interesting to see what the secondary market does for these Georgia games in Athens. We've seen expensive road games, and even the people who make them the donations to get them through the Athletic Association, for the most part, will tell you it's a lot harder to get away tickets than it is home tickets. I think that could be a really interesting dynamic to watch this year. Tyler Roberts says the first SEC game, not opening a season with them unless it was in the 90s. So he's referencing being in Nashville and against Vanderbilt in week 1. I think that's actually a really fun game. I think Nashville's going to be loaded up with Georgia fans that week. I think obviously the stadium's going to be, majority Georgia fans. They'll be easily scarfing up those tickets. This, to me, is not a bad way to start the season. A little bit weird playing Vanderbilt week 1. Normally that's an October game for Georgia in a lot of years. But I'm not going to be mad at it. I'm actually pretty excited about on the road in Nashville week 1 against Vanderbilt. I think that's really fun.
Maurice Carter asks, BA, if Georgia goes unbeaten into the Auburn game and beats Auburn and then goes in the A&M game and loses, what do you think the outcome will be for Georgia? I think as long as Georgia continues to get to the SEC championship game with either 0 or 1 losses, and they win the SEC championship game, That team is going to be in the playoff.
I think what he's asking, though, is the chances of Georgia having a playoff ticket punch before the SEC championship game takes place, which a lot of people thought that Alabama did a year ago. That, to me, feels like what Maurice is asking there. And the honest truth is, even after another year of what could be a stellar record, I just don't know that Georgia's going to get the same benefit of the doubt that a team like Alabama
I don't think
would have gotten.
Alabama's going to get the benefit of the doubt next year either, with them getting blown out by Clemson.
Yeah,
And, I mean, you were saying all year this year you didn't think the SEC was getting two teams in the playoff anyway.
Yeah, so I would stand a reason for me that if it's Georgia in that spot, that it could be Georgia left out again, because I think the committee is going to be slow to want to do this. They did it for Ohio State and probably lived to regret it because Ohio State got blown out. Now, last year, Alabama, or I should say 2 years ago, Alabama got the benefit of the doubt and won the national championship, but I don't think that curried much favor with the other regions of the country. I'll always believe the committee is going to be really slow to want to do this because they're trying to make the majority of people happy, and multiple SEC teams is the opposite of the best way to do that. So I don't think Georgia, even next November or this upcoming November, will have enough cachet to punch a ticket to the playoff prior to the SEC championship game.
I agree.
I don't think it's there.
And I don't think you should either.
You know, that's where I'm going to be a little bit different, just because I just think that the gap between the SEC and some of these other leagues is really growing. I think that in some respects it's never been wider than it is right now. So I'd be fine with the statement of we just think this league is way better than the others, but they obviously have a lot of reasons why that's not a good thing for them to do. Georgia Peach says hard for the committee to put two teams from the SEC in again. We got to win the SEC championship game. Yeah, I mean, the other thing is there's something really valuable about Georgia vanquishing the nemesis that it's had, which is Alabama. Now, we've seen somebody beat Alabama, so from that standpoint, you know, Georgia will only be doing what Clemson did a year ago. I don't think that changes the value in Georgia if it can indeed slay this dragon that has been such a issue for Georgia. What a moment that'll be. What an exciting time that'll be.
I mean, we've talked about this, but the dream is Georgia beats Alabama in the SEC championship game. Georgia plays Clemson in the Peach Bowl, and then they play the winner of Ohio State-Washington in the national championship game, and Georgia wins that. That's the dream season right there. Georgia beats Alabama. They beat Trevor Lawrence, who was an in-state kid, and then they beat the winner of the five-star departee Georgia quarterback.
I mean, there is certainly no shortage of potential intriguing matchups, and it's hard to imagine what the fever pitch would be like if you get into a college football playoff time, and some of those games that Connor just described are part of this. Greg Childers on the subject of who Alabama's second-half quarterback is going to be next year. Yeah, maybe
Mac Jones.
Maybe finally Georgia can keep the same quarterback in for an entire game. Mark Drury says, looking at the last two times we played Alabama, the only thing we need to learn is how to finish, considering we led in both those games for over 90% of the snaps. And, Mark, I know that a lot of Alabama people use that against me as a way of saying, oh, you came close, how you ever going to get over the hump? And my point in response to that is that the way in which Georgia's played Alabama the last couple of years is not an argument against Georgia. It's an argument in favor of Georgia. And it sounds like you're kind of on the same token. There just aren't that many teams that are capable of going head-to-head with Alabama. I'm not saying there's a consolation prize for coming up, close losses. That's not what I'm saying. There's no moral victory. But there is a clear category of, top-flight elite football teams. And as I said to Bill Bender when he was on the show a little earlier, Georgia's a lot closer to that than some people might realize. A lot closer to that. Jeremy Osteen makes an interesting statement. I think this is really interesting. He says the chances are good that we could play Texas A&M twice next year. Now, that may seem crazy at first blush, but 2 years ago, Alabama did not win the SEC West. I mean, it's really easy to just sort of assume that Alabama has won the West every year and will continue to do that, but I mean, other teams have beaten Alabama for the West. Auburn included, in 2017. And I have to admit the thought has occurred to me that when these two teams play in November, it's not inconceivable that it could be a rematch twice over the course of 3 weeks. Another reason why I think it's just asinine that Georgia's put its hand in the air to say, hey, we'll play a top 10 team, or certainly, in anyone's estimation, close to a top 10 team on Cupcake Saturday while everybody else is playing Hoover High School and Colquitt County and everything else. Georgia's going to go knock down, drag out with Jimbo Fisher in Sanford Stadium. It is not a foregone conclusion that Texas A&M team might not be the division winner, nor is it out of the realm of possibility they come to Athens with the division on the line. They will probably play, LSU, I'm guessing, to finish the season. That's typically what Texas A&M does. So there is a chance that that they could come to Athens with the division on the line. And by the way, Florida's going to be a top 10 team. You're going to have, improved SEC East teams the other way around too. Georgia fans don't hope this is the case, but I mean, it's just been kind of a long time around here that any division's been in doubt late in the year. Georgia's won the East the last couple of years. What if that A&M game in November, both teams have divisions on the line still? What if that's still a game of magnitude with Georgia trying to win the East? And that's not what Georgia fans hope, because they hope they sweep the division and get that cleared up before Texas A&M comes to town. But that's another thing about that is you could actually have that game being a game of consequence for both teams.
So I've got A&M's schedule pulled up.
Yeah.
They get Auburn at home next year.
Now, they haven't always been great at home in the Kevin Sumlin era, but obviously Jimbo Fisher's trying to change that.
And I believe every year since A&M has joined the league, the road team has won that Auburn A&M game.
There's a lot of weird stuff like that with A&M where big wins come on the road. Now, they almost beat Clemson this year, so maybe Jimbo's exercising that demon. But Kyle Field has not been a great home field advantage, despite the fact that it's a really loud crowd.
They do get a bye week, and then they are home to Alabama. They get a home game, so they get a week off, and then they get to play. And they play Arkansas the week before the bye, so you might as well get 2 weeks off.
Yeah, 2 weeks.
But to your point about the division being on the line for A&M, this is probably maybe the toughest last 2 week stretch in all of college football. At Georgia on November 23rd, at LSU on November 30th.
That is gross. That is really hard.
Yeah, like we talk about
really bad.
We talk about Georgia not getting any favors with their schedule. That A&M schedule is disgusting.
That's bad enough. If they were to somehow win the division, all of that'd have to be a factor in the point spread for the SEC championship game. Those rugged road tests. 500 miles apart too. I mean, and A&M's the case of College Station to Athens, probably, close to 1,000 miles, and then, back to Louisiana, and then back to Atlanta again. That'd be a negative.
Three straight weeks. You're at Georgia, at LSU, and then Georgia again, and theoretically Georgia again in a neutral site in Atlanta.
That'd be a negative factor for me in trying to establish a point spread for the SEC championship for sure. Daniel Moore's prediction is that Georgia goes 11-1, wins the East. A&M finishes 10-2, beats Alabama in a tiebreaker.
So you're telling me Alabama's going to lose twice? Or, well, they do play Clemson next year, so A&M does, not Alabama.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Alabama faces more good Western competition than it's seen in quite some time. Now, its non-conference game is Duke next year, and its 2 SEC East games are a joke as well. I want to say it's obviously Tennessee, and then the other game I think maybe South Carolina, if I'm remembering correctly.
Stephen Garcia isn't walking through that door.
No. So there's, the Eastern non-conference stuff for Alabama is pretty easy. But I do think the collection of Auburn, LSU, Texas A&M, I think that's 3 pretty tough West Division teams. I don't really know too much about Ole Miss, Mississippi State, Arkansas. My assumption is they probably won't be very good, none of those 3 teams. But the other 3 teams that I just mentioned, that's a pretty tough division schedule. Could Alabama lose one of those games? I could definitely see that. For sure. Let me also mention what Greg Childers says here. This is a really good point to bring up. One of the cool things that Kirby Smart has done since being at Georgia, and I don't think he gets enough credit for this, is, and Greg brings this up and he's right, Sanford Stadium has become a home field advantage, both in terms of the actual tangible results and the feeling in the stadium. Good games have loud crowds, which is a cool thing to see, but Georgia's winning home games. Gosh, go back and look before that. Certainly 2016, 2015. Georgia lost a lot of home games, and not always not always in impressive fashion. Georgia has lost a lot of home games in bygone eras. Last couple of years, one of the most impressive facets of Kirby Smart's turnaround of the Georgia program is how good Georgia's been at home. I think that's a really good point. A really good point. R.S. Andrews, cool down. We're going to get ready to wrap up here in a moment. John Paul Oviedo says Alabama's going to have a harder time making it to Atlanta than Georgia. Now, Alabama's going to be ranked ahead of Georgia in all these preseason lists, but in terms of pathways to the division, I don't think you're wrong about that. I really don't. I don't necessarily think that you're wrong about that at all, especially in comparison to the way that Georgia's still going to be viewed compared to the rest of the SEC East. Let's see. Will Marlowe and some others over here on YouTube talking about the Ole Miss situation. Yeah, I know they've run into hard times again. I actually kind of feel sorry for those Ole Miss fans. I feel like they've been through a lot. I think and I know that there's always going to be some bad blood between Georgia and Ole Miss going back to the Laramie Tunsil recruitment. I do get all of that. But overall, my feeling of Ole Miss is a little bit similar to my feeling about how Missouri was handled by the NCAA this year. I think that Missouri and Ole Miss were the kinds of teams that the NCAA feels like it can kick around. I mean, go read some of the stories of the way that Leo Lewis, for instance, the way that his testimony was used. He said a lot of things about a lot of different SEC schools, and seemingly the NCAA was only interested in what he had to say about Ole Miss. I'm not a Rebels fan, but I don't know. There's always been an aspect of that Ole Miss treatment from the NCAA that I've always felt like was a little bit heavy-handed or something. I'm not quite sure.
And despite what the NCAA tries to do, they can never take away the fact that Dr. Bo Wallace, beat Alabama.
Was that one of the games that got taken away?
I believe it is.
Okay, yeah, that 2014 game in now you're talking about the 2014 or the 2015 game?
15 was Chad Kelly.
Okay, yeah. That game in Oxford that year when that crowd was so loud,
Katy
game
Perry
day was there.
there.
Katy Perry was there. That was a great moment in SEC history for sure. For sure. Now, K9 Blues asks a good question, and people always get mad when this kind of stuff comes up. He says, what injury would hurt the Dogs the most, not counting Fromm? I've already knocked on wood for any answer that you might give. So, the good thing about Georgia is they ought not be that susceptible to a really devastating injury next year. Now, quarterback goes without saying. I guess my answer to that would be when DeAndre Swift was healthy this year, you saw a Heisman caliber running back. I think it would have been very interesting to see what Swift's end of year perception would have been had he been as healthy in November as he was, or I should say, if he was as healthy in September and October as he was in November. That could have been a very interesting thing to see. I have high hopes for James Cook and Zamir White and all those guys. I think that Georgia would also be in some pretty significant trouble if it had to play without DeAndre Swift, or if it's a less than 100% DeAndre Swift. You need that wow factor that he brings to the running back position, and it does remain to be seen if Zamir and James or those guys are going to have that this year. Brian Herring, I think, is on the field a lot, but the kind of extra wiggle that DeAndre Swift has, do we have that in Brian Herring if you're Georgia? You got to keep Swift almost as healthy as you got to keep Fromm. It's deeper at the running back position, the quarterback position, but in terms of oh my gosh level performers, you got to keep DeAndre Swift healthy too, I believe.
So I think it took you a little bit too long to arrive at the DeAndre Swift answer. I mean, to your point, he's clearly a different player. The Georgia offense was different when he was a healthy player and when he was not. And for a defensive player, Kirk Warner on YouTube, I agree with this. When Jordan Davis played this year, the Georgia defense was really good. When he did not, they really struggled to stop the run against physical teams like LSU and Texas.
I mean, I hate to say it this way. I don't mean to close out my pre-vacation show on a negative note. It is an indictment of Georgia to a certain extent that Jordan Davis is as important to that team as he was. That's a little bit of an indictment. Like Jordan Davis.
On the other 10 guys on defense.
Yeah, Jordan Davis should not be that important to your run stop. You ought to have enough depth to be able to absorb that. Davis has proven himself to be a really good player. But, yeah, as of right now, Jordan Davis manning the middle is not an injury you want to deal with either. I think it's a really good point.
They're bringing in another nose tackle type guy, and I think Zion Logue is the more nose tackle.
I think he is, and
Timon Mitchell is the more further in the line.
Georgia JC69 also mentions Tramel Walthour maybe being a part of that conversation this year too. Could very well be. I think they're going to be a little happier with their depth with all those names we just mentioned. But last year, losing Jordan Davis was a big, big deal when he wasn't there to do. For sure. All right, we're going to get ready to wrap up the week for us. Thank you all so much. Really fun conversation. It's our R.S. Andrews Cool Down. We do it every day on DawgNation Daily, and next Thursday we'll be doing it again. For now, though, let me just say thank you so much for giving us the freedom to take a little bit of time off. No show for us on Friday. Also off Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, returning next Thursday. I'm really looking forward to just kind of recharging the batteries. It's been a great run for us over the last few months on DawgNation Daily, but I'm not going to lie to you. It's going to feel good to take a breath and catch up and relax and hopefully come back ready to go for a really fun ride into the spring practice heading towards G-Day on April the 20th. So we're really excited about all of that. Hope you enjoy your time between now and next Thursday as well. Don't forget, there'll still be plenty of DawgNation. As somebody said, all the other shows are going to be taking place. Chips, Mike's, everybody else. A lot of great stuff at the website every day at DawgNation.com. And DawgNation Daily will look forward to returning next Thursday. Y'all have a great time, and we'll see you then for the regular program and our R.S. Andrews Cool Down as well. Have a great day, everybody.